Many of the principles of the Montreal Protocol and the lessons we learned from that experience are directly applicable to the challenge that we face here. They use the following tools: common but differentiated pollution reduction targets, decisions based on the latest updated scientific assessments. They included an ability to add new pollutants as the science evolves. That's relevant to the black carbon contribution to global warming. They recognize the importance of focusing on all of the major pollutants and not just one. And they included finance and technical assistance for developing countries. And most importantly, they embodied in that treaty the sense that we are all in this together. This year, in 2009, the Montreal Protocol became the first environmental treaty in United Nations history to achieve universal ratification in the world. And even though it will take several more decades, we already know that this treaty has been successful in beginning the healing of the stratospheric ozone layer. Now, there are those who say that we should not take on a new treaty, or in some cases, legislation in this area, during a time of economic stress, even though the conversion to a low-carbon economy is the single greatest source of new jobs in the world economy today. There are those who say that a time of war, when my nation is focused, as some others are, on Afghanistan and Iraq, that we should not focus on global warming, even though we are already seeing the beginning of conflicts created by the early consequences of global warming, even though we know that the world's continued dangerous dependence on oil markets that are dominated by the largest supplies in one of the most vulnerable and potentially unstable regions of the world has already contributed to conflicts and wars. As a result, the security crisis, the economic crisis, and the climate crisis sometimes seem unsolvable when approached and described in isolation. And yet, when we look at all three of them closely, we see the common thread running through them, deeply ironic in its simplicity, and that is our dangerous overdependence on carbon-based fuels and the other sources of global warming pollution. If we grab hold of that thread and pull it hard, all three of these complex problems begin to unravel, and we hold one of the principal answers to all of them right in our hand: an historic commitment to put people to work, building the infrastructure and technology base for a massive and speedy shift away from coal and oil and carbon-based fuels toward renewable forms of energy, away from unsustainable forms of development that include deforestation and industrial agriculture and factory farming. The impacts of global warming, some of which I have referred to, can seem remote. The truth is that the effects are distributed throughout the Earth in a way that causes this crisis to masquerade as an abstraction. The length of time between the causes and the consequences stretches out over a longer period than we are used to dealing with, which gives us the illusion that we have the luxury of time. Neither of those things is true. It is concrete and real and affecting us today. We do not have more time. We have 3 days to achieve a successful outcome here in Montreal. Because the benefits of solving the crisis lie in the future, while the solutions must be undertaken now. Reason-based analysis has thus far proved of limited value in motivating action. The common behaviors causing the crisis, particularly the massive burning of coal and oil worldwide and the destruction and burning of forests, are ingrained in our civilization. But we know what the right course is. 2 years ago in Bali, I asked delegates and negotiators to resist the temptation to walk out in anger at the intransigence of the United States. And I said to the group gathered there, and many of you were present, that in the United States we were likely to soon have a new president who was committed to constructive engagement in this process. Even though some of you are feeling frustration at this meeting with the reluctance of the United States and some other large emitters to take bolder action, I would ask you to look at the facts. New opportunities are present. President Obama brought in a new administration. He brought a new voice and a willingness to lead on climate. President Obama's election has represented a return to the respect for science that any government should have. The United States has begun the process of regulating CO2, has already increased fuel economy standards to over 35 miles per gallon by 2016, passed a green stimulus committing more than $80 billion to the process of converting to a lower carbon economy, created the nation's first greenhouse gas reporting system, monitoring for facilities representing 85% of U.S. emissions, and those reporting obligations begin 2 weeks from now. Passed historic global warming legislation, albeit legislation that is weaker than I and many of you would like to see, but passed it through the House of Representatives and began the process of moving the legislation through the Senate. He re-engaged the international treaty process and will be personally coming here at the end of this week. Other nations have provided leadership during the period when this process has suffered difficulties, and I want to honor the fact that the European Union has long been a leader in these talks and is meeting its Kyoto obligations. In addition, just in the last week, European leaders have agreed to $10.6 billion US over the next 3 years to help developing nations adapt to climate change. And in announcing the deal, Swedish Prime Minister Fredrik Reinfeldt said that all 27 EU member nations would contribute and that the EU would do its fair share. Japan, similarly, has offered leadership during these years just past, and under its new national leadership has proposed a bold new target of a 25% reduction below 1990 levels, which contributed to the injection of new momentum behind the talks this fall. Australia passed elements of a green stimulus and a law demanding that 20% of the country's electricity come from renewable sources by 2020, matching European targets. Kevin Rudd will also be here this week. Mexico has pledged to reduce emissions to 50% of their 2002 level by 2050, including cutting 50 million tons per year between now and 2012. President Calderon has also called for a global green fund to help developing nations implement carbon reductions and has pledged that Mexico will itself contribute to that fund and not only withdraw from that fund. Other nations have begun to pledge similar financial support. Brazil, under President Lula, has put forward a bold pledge for mitigation and has put forward creative proposals on deforestation worldwide and is a leader in cellulosic ethanol. In the 90s, Denmark, Sweden, Norway, and Finland became the first countries to institute carbon taxes. First Finland, followed by Denmark in the same year, 1990. Then Sweden and Norway 1 year later. As a result of these taxes, these countries have become world leaders in technology like wind power here in Denmark, carbon sequestration in Norway, biomass, next generation biomass in Sweden, and district heating in Finland and Sweden, just to mention a few.